Good.
So hey everybody, I'm Laura Mignott, CEO of the experience agency D Flash and the host of the Reset podcast. So excited to have a great conversation with Dr. Jay Kumar, who's author of the Happiness Project. And obviously we had a little bit of technical snafus on Facebook Live, so we went to our old standard, the thing called Zoom. We're going to record this lovely session and just have a great conversation about how do we help, how do we heal. And so we hope you'll take a listen and get some good nuggets and from our conversation. So welcome. Hi, Jay.
Hey, Laura, how you doing?
Outside of Facebook not wanting us to be great, awesome.
Yeah, we're zooming on Zoom right now, so we're all good.
This may or may not have been my 500th Zoom call, but that's okay.
Exactly.
But I think it would be cool to kind of start off the conversation and talking about what's kind of when we were chatting last week, like how did we get here? Like what is I think we're all in this very unique state of upheaval and uncertainty, and it's scary. So how did we get here? What is the thing that's happening right now?
Yeah, there's so much going on right now in terms of the levels of they're like competing crises all happening together. We're a couple months ago, we're all consumed with the health crisis with COVID, and then there's the economic, kind of the employment crisis. But now I think the crisis we're in right now is actually a crisis we've been in for centuries. It's this whole idea of it's interesting, as you said, I have a book called Science for Happy Brain, but I'm also a director of contemplative practices and well-being at Chapman University. And in that position at Chapman University, at the Fish Interface Center, we're really advocating this idea of social justice and social equality. And what's really fascinating is that we're living in a time right now where there has been so much trauma that, my friend Dr. Gail Stearns is actually on this Zoom call. She talks about this idea of racialized trauma and how trauma can be actually passed. And my study of brain science and behavior, for people who are going to be watching this later, or watching it live right now. From all the studies we know from brain science and behavior, there are three things we know about the brain. One, the brain's a social organ, and it needs community and connection. And when it lacks that sense of belonging, it actually experiences pain. Like social pain is just as real as physical pain. But what we're also discovering is that trauma can be passed down generationally. So what we're experiencing right now is centuries of racialized trauma, and the wounds that have occurred from that are now being forced to be healed. And it's not just a certain segment of society, it's all of us together are in this healing process. So it's why, how do we help, how do we heal? This conversation is so crucial.
Well, I think it's so important because I think, for a lot of Black people, like understanding what racial trauma is something that is endemic to us. But I think for a lot of, non-Black people, they're like, wait, what do you mean generational trauma? And how do you sort of encapsulate that? And so it's all coming to the fore now because we've had everything sort of forced into front of our faces. I think part of the reason why we're at this very unique moment right now is that we all collectively saw something in horror, and it wasn't like something that you could walk away from. And, it's one of those things where, the kind of rubbernecking experience where like, oh, you want to stop and look at a train wreck, but there's a couple of seconds you keep on moving, as opposed to something that lasts 8 minutes and 46 seconds where you can't look away. But as you look away, it's a part of your humanity keeps getting stripped away as you're watching someone go die their last breath. So it's really hard for folks to sort of understand what that means for Black people in regards to what generational trauma is. How do we get folks to understand what it is?
Yeah, so that's a really key point, Laura, you just brought up. And this whole notion of trauma is the one thing we should be very clear about is that, trauma is not experienced equally among members of society. The trauma that I, maybe as a person of color as well, is not maybe the same level of trauma as someone who is a person of, African, someone who's Black, someone who's Black in this country. There's a whole level of trauma and, I think stress that is different. So, in terms of how do we get here, this is something I think it's really important to talk about in the context of American democracy. This whole notion, I talk about this in my book, Science to Be Happy Brain, and I teach a happiness course at Chapman University. We talk about this in the first day. It's that happiness is not an individual pursuit exclusively. It is one that really is a societal endeavor. And this is something that, the American founders of the Constitution or Declaration of Independence, wrote. All humans are denied with the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Now, granted, back in the 1700s, that right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness was pretty much exclusive to a very specific segment of society, white male landowners. And everyone else was not, afforded that access to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. So, what we're kind of experiencing right now is how do we begin to recognize that these ideals of American democracy can no longer be maybe conferred upon to an exclusive segment of society. And when you have generations of individuals or segments of society that have been actively or systematically or institutionally denied this level of access to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, something really remarkable takes place in the brain. And this powerful idea is that your brain, my brain, cannot really distinguish the difference between physical pain, like breaking a bone, or what we call social pain or emotional pain, feeling marginalized, feeling a broken bond. So I say in my book, Science to Be Happy Brain, this whole idea is that a broken bone is just as painful as feeling a broken bond. And so what we need, I think what we fundamentally as humans, I think strive for is the need for value, belonging, and the need for connection, which is really what this conversation is about, the power of connection. How do we begin to let people recognize, people who have felt for generations, not feeling connected, or when I say connected, not being seen and heard or valued as equals in our society, that actually, believe it or not, creates real pain and disruption and trauma in the brain, which then leads to a host of health issues, economic concerns as well. So how do we begin to heal? Healing is what's going on right now. And guess what, folks? Healing is not always a gentle process. Healing can be painful. I kind of look at healing as a return to a state of wholeness, as returning to a state of oneness. And this is what we're experiencing right now. And what's really wonderful and powerful about this period we're in right now, Laura, is that more people, more segments of our society are recognizing we've been wounded for far too long, not just in terms of racial equality, but the economic injustice, social inequality, all the rights, the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness really have been denied in so many ways for such a long time to so many people. And what we're seeing right now are the healing cries, if you will, the healing pain, the wound. And I write this in my book as well. It's the first thing I talk about in my book. There's a wonderful poet, a Sufi poet. This is the Sufi tradition, which comes from ancient Persia, Rumi, and he has this beautiful quote that says, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." The wound is the place where light enters you. So what we're experiencing right now is the wound has been freshly there. The wound has been there for a while. But I think what's happening right now is the scab has been pulled off. And because we now have the scab pulled off, the wound is now fresh and raw and open. But it also provides a powerful opportunity for the light of compassion, justice, empathy, and equality to come in and to heal the soul of our nation.
It's interesting. I think, and it's beautifully said, I think a lot of folks right now, that wound is just so painful and so hard for people to kind of get through. I think, for a lot of folks where it's been hard to sleep recently because like there's been so much of this upheaval and, you know, sort of this weird fear that you know, I think it's weird. I think it's obviously, I call it kind of the toxic soup, where we had a pandemic, 40 million people lose their jobs, and then sort of the annual spring summer where a black man gets killed on video. But that all happened within a matter of 6 weeks. Not only did one black man, there was Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and then George Floyd. And in between there was Christian Cooper, who got Amy Coopered. So basically all these elements came together in a matter of 6 to 8 weeks on top of all the other things that were already stressing everyone. And you essentially get to this point where like, this wound now feels so painful. I don't think a lot of folks can figure out how to get through it. And so how does one even begin to, you know, heal and feel like, you know, they're coming out of it? And what can others do to help them?
Yeah, so you know, this is that's a powerful question, and there is no one short answer to this.
Oh, come on, there's gotta be.
Yeah, right. It's kind of like is there like a
It's in the book, you
know. You know, I think people are sick and tired of being sick and tired, is what it is right now. And I think, you know, we've been sick and tired for so long. Not many of us, in terms of just feeling overburdened with so much is happening in our social, societal, environment. But I think, you know, what we're really addressing, and just to just kind of, for those of us who are joining in, when we talk about healing, we're talking not just about healing physical wounds, we're talking about deep psychological, societal wounds as well. And so, you know, one thing I know, you and I, how we connected, it was through genconnectU. We both have courses on genconnectU, and in the course I have on genconnectU, Investing in Happiness, and also in my book, I talk about the 4 C's and how we can begin to really bring about healing and return that state of wholeness. And the 4 C's are comfort, contribution, connection, which is what we're talking about here, and then compassion. So comfort, contribution, connection, and compassion. So what does comfort look like? Well, you know, I think what we're really experiencing right now is like people want to know, like, how can I just feel that sense of safety and comfort just being a person in this society? But I think what's really important for many of us to understand is that we're all grieving, and there's a deep, profound sense of grief and trauma. So comfort can also mean, you know, as you begin to voice your opinions and you begin to express your voice of concern or, just being heard, please be sure to take care of yourself. Do things that bring you comfort as well. So make sure you get enough rest, enough sleep, and, you know, really begin to ensure that others who are also suffering experience that sense of comfort as well. Contribution is the second C. This idea is that all of us play a small part. You know, not everyone can go out into the streets and protest, but we all can voice our, it's almost like the river flows in many ways, and the river doesn't just flow in one way, but the river always leads to some point. So you can hop into the river anytime you want, anywhere you want. You can swim in it, you can ride in a raft, you can paddleboard in it, whatever you want. But so for some of us, even just doing this is a form of contribution. Even, you know, the work that I do at Chapman University at the Fish Interfaith Center with my fellow chaplains and colleagues, it's providing spiritual care. This idea of like where we see you. So contribution can be just something as simple as knowing that others are being seen and heard and valued for who they are. And your contribution can be something as you're showing a sign of support, you know, holding a sign or being on the streets or writing a piece or doing something, a Facebook Live event like this, or just calling someone that you know might be struggling during this time, or someone, you know, who has experienced this whole racial trauma, this racialized trauma, you know, for generations. The third is connection, what we're doing here. You know, what I find so beautiful about what I see on TV or on the media, it's not just, you know, Black people, you know, African Americans, people one racial, you know, segment of society who are protesting. It's everyone. It's everyone out there. And so this idea is that what really is empowering and what I find hopeful about this time is that people or tribes, if you will, that normally wouldn't come together are connecting. So you have like elderly grandmas coming together, you know, who are protesting on the streets. You've got LGBTQ people protesting, you know, or what I say, protesting, contributing, and you know, adding their voice to this healing. You have people from all shapes and stripes, you know, connecting, coming together. And the last piece is compassion. We can never truly know the struggles and pain of someone else unless we just keep our heart open. Keep our heart open, keep our minds open. You know, I think we talked about this earlier, you know, listen, learn, and love.
Yeah.
Listen, learn, love.
So mine is listen, learn, and act.
Act.
uh, because I think, you know, it's interesting. I've had a really interesting, I guess, like 2 weeks. And, you know, I think similar to a lot of Black folks, you know, I have lots and lots of white friends who I love dearly, who suddenly realized I was Black. And so, and we're like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. What do I do? And, you know, I love them to death, but it got a little exhausting last week with all the check-ins and the questions and what do we do? And, you know, it sort of all came to a head. Like, I had this conversation with someone I hadn't talked to in like 20 plus years. And I don't know how they found me. I think on LinkedIn. And he wanted to have a conversation about this. And part of me was like, are you kidding me? But then, you know, it was one of those very transformative conversations because it allowed me kind of following in all four of C's, like having the compassion that like, okay, the reason why this person is actually reaching out is in that in 20 plus years, they didn't find anyone who they felt could at least give them the time of day to sort of explain what this actually is about. I think a lot of it is that for a lot of folks, it is a privilege to study racism versus to experience it. And so if that is the case, it is another universe to navigate to help other folks understand here's how you have to learn about it. And as exhausting as I originally thought it would be, it was actually a meaningful conversation because it allowed me to give examples, but also listen to what it is when someone's like, I just do not understand. And I know that all of this is wrong and I want to do better, but I don't even know where to start. And I think that, Google is free, but oftentimes I think that if someone does reach out, that the level of compassion that you have to do on your own terms, and I think everyone has to find their own terms, but if you do start, cause I always start with empathy and okay, let me put myself in your shoes, the better. That's how we get through this, because that's how you get people to listen, learn, and act. If we go from go Google and then I send you off to your own devices, then I've done what I can do. But if I say, okay, go Google, but also if you have a question, ask. I may not get back to you today because this is exhausting, but I will get back to you. I also think is important as a way for us to begin to heal.
Yeah. So I'll mainly ask you the question: how do you feel? What do you feel like? In what ways we are healing right now? How does healing look for you?
I'm not sure. Honestly, I don't know. I mean, it is a very weird time in so many ways. In my day-to-day job running an agency where, it's never been our focus around diversity and inclusion. By default, I have a diverse company because I own it, and that's how I built my company. So to get lots of inbound inquiries from companies being like, hey, can you help, is wonderful because it's practical. Two, it's surprising because I'm like, this is all things that folks have been saying to you for years, and it literally took someone to get lynched on national television for you to finally get a clue. But also, how do you make this meaningful and lasting? Because I think for a lot of folks, part of the healing process is, will this bone actually get healed, or is it just being reset? And so it's going to be reset, which means great, but it can still break again. So the idea of what actually lasting impact, lasting change, when the protests stop, what's going to be the thing that actually moves us forward for real is what I'm looking for when I think about healing.
Right. So it's not just a temporary healing. We're talking about enduring resilience. We know from biology, when a bone breaks, it mends, becomes stronger, but it can still break. Again. But the great thing, I think maybe people think we should all maybe just focus on, is how can we just ensure that we keep that the bone will reset, become stronger. Society will become stronger from this. But it doesn't mean that we're guaranteed not to fracture or to break again. But I feel like the more people are joining in the healing process, I think that for me, and again, I'm speaking of someone who, I'm being very, clear. It's like my issues with racism are not the same as maybe Laura, your experiences with racism, and someone who is a person of a person, a white person in the society. May never even experience any form of racism in this country. Maybe when they go to another country, they do. But this whole idea is that, at least I'm finding myself, that we talk about how this is, we hear the word Black Lives Matter, which is, yes, very important. But I think for me, what I find so empowering about the situation, it's bringing up the notion that racism or racial inequality or social injustice, we all can relate to it in some way. We all can relate to it in some way. So, I'm just saying, even you don't have to be someone who is a person of color to maybe have experienced social injustice or perhaps experienced some form of inequality or injustice in your own life. So this is where I think I kind of revert to my whole brain science and behavior thing. I think what was so powerful about the George Floyd video, which we all saw over and over again, there's a system in the brain called the mirror neuron system. I don't want to get too brain sciencey here, but this explains.
Go for it.
Go for it. Okay. This really, I think, explains to people who are watching this now or later on why this video, I think, just gripped us and just kind of just like shook us out of our complacency. Is that when you see someone who, let me give you an example. When you see someone carrying a bag of groceries and that person like falls down in the street and they hurt their leg or they cry out in pain, what mirror neurons do, and this is, I think, why it's so important to realize this, the part of my brain that fires is the same part of the brain as if I just fell down and dropped a bag of groceries and am feeling a sense of discomfort. We are empathically wired to come to the help and support of each other. And the system in the brain called the mirror neuron system reinforces this whole notion of what I call the social brain. Our brain's a social organ that evolved for community and connection and belonging. When we see others in pain or suffering, especially something like graphic like that in the video, there's a part of our brain, most people's healthy brains, that fire as if we were the person experiencing that pain. And so when you see someone like George Floyd or anyone that you see suffering on the street, there is this instinctual mechanism in our brain that fires and says, I cannot allow this to happen. I see someone in pain, and the why we respond or why we choose to react, it literally is because the same regions or mechanisms in my brain are firing as if I am the victim of that pain and injustice. So I think this is one reason I think where social media or visual media became so powerful. I know we've seen this in the past, other graphic images that are happening, but there's something so raw and something just so, I don't know, visceral is the right word, just so ugly, I think about is the right word. Something so ugly and harsh about what we saw that force people to rise up and say, even though I may never have experienced uh, racial, racism or inequality, my brain is firing as if I am that person now who is on the ground, begging for my life. And I think,
So,
yeah,
so there's really a scientific reason. But it's interesting. I think I would say that because, like, if you walk down the street and you see a girl crying, your immediate is like, oh, why is she crying?
yeah,
And I think also depending on your collective mood, that you may also start to tear up as well, because, like, if you're having a bad day and then you see someone crying on a train, you might just start crying yourself. And I think, now that makes total sense, because if you
yeah,
think about it, everyone's been in, like, a very weird, panicked, upset, anxious state to begin with before that video got aired. And then you add in to, like, because obviously we were 2.5, 3 months into COVID lockdown when this video shows up. And then on top of all that stress and all that anxiety, now you put this other thing where you now see someone pass away, murdered on television, and you can't look away, because it's not just a 2-second thing. It is playing for a long time. Like, our attention spans are so short, and to think that people actually sat through that video, have sat through different things on TV where they've been a commemorative 8 minutes and change, that I can get it now. Where yeah, of course, like, your brain goes, wait a minute, that could be.
yeah. There's an empathic response that we have when we see others in pain and suffering. And I like to say this. It's in times of crisis. We are in a crisis. There are multiple crises happening, but let's talk about the racial, societal, civic crisis we're in right now. I find that in times of crisis and in times of when that empathic response really triggers, this is when real change begins to happen. This is when real transformation, I think I use the word transformation, but this is what's really happening. Healing is not just a process of wholeness, coming to wholeness. Healing can also be a process of transformation. And transformation isn't so much about, it's not an easy process. Think about this whole idea of, like, I always use that example, the caterpillar going to the butterfly, becoming a butterfly. That process of transformation is intensely painful and confusing and stressful. And this is the period we're in right now. We're kind of in that stage of metamorphosis and transformation. And this is where we need to really all come together. The whole, focus of this conversation, power of connection. How can we come together and start connecting? And one way we do this, as you just said, Laura, is we listen. We learn. We then, for someone who may not know, what is it like to be in the shoes of someone who's experienced racialized trauma or racism? Ask that person. These are not easy conversations. And I think that one thing that we do, in my role at Chapman University, we really advise individuals in that sense of compassion and care. But we're also very mindful of what are ways we can begin to engage in effective, nonviolent communication and really begin to affect change in such a way. I come from the Indian, subcontinent Indian tradition. And so Mahatma Gandhi, as many people know, he was an advocate, for nonviolent action. He influenced Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela. We know this, from history. But there's something very powerful when people choose to respond with compassion and empathy. And by all means, it is okay to feel what you're feeling. The feelings of anger and frustration and rage, honor those feelings. But ultimately, we need to engage in strategies, as you just saying, Laura, over here. Engage in strategies or in tools that begin to advance this empowering conversations around race, social justice, and find out what are the tools, what's the language we need to start using to engage in this nonviolent communication. What are some ways we can begin to actually have meaningful, deep conversations with others especially those who might not agree with this, what's going on right now, or might have very, polar opposite views. And the one thing I'll say, and I'm sure we can talk more about this, as I find in the work that I do and from the brain science research, the one way to engage with people or connect with people, it's about power connection, find the one thing you both share in common.
Yeah.
So that's it. It's so simple. All that is a one simple thing. You find the power of connection is recognizing and then cultivating the one common bond you and the other person have. It could also be someone you perceive as the enemy.
Well, I think that's interesting because I wonder about that, where I think for some folks it just isn't mentally healthy to engage.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen a lot of my friends sort of defriend people on Facebook because they just did not want to, like, they saw a post they made. I get a screen grab via text, like, and in response, do you believe what this person just said? And you're like, for my mental health, I'm just not going to engage. And I get that, like, having that one-to-one conversation can be helpful to try and find some common ground. But I also feel like, it's important to sort of make the choice that makes sort of sense for you right now in this moment while you're healing. It doesn't mean that you may not come back to it, where, like, you may want to engage again. But because I know I do this. Like, I will see some things and I'm like, are you serious? But for me, it's like, I don't want the argument. I just, like, I don't have enough heart space to kind of go into those kind of conversations. And I see that's a common thing I'm seeing a lot of folks do as well right now.
Yeah, no, Laura, you bring up a really great point. And this is something I think I was having a conversation with some of my colleagues as well earlier this week and even today. I see some things on Facebook or on social media from people who are my friends, people I've known from high school, people who, from other parts of my life, even family members who, let's put it diplomatically, see the situation in a different light. I'm putting it very gently.
That was very gentle,
And the first thing I do is I'm not going to befriend you because I love you and I care about you. Just because we look differently or think differently or vote differently or love differently doesn't mean I have to deny you as a person who's someone important to my life. But what we're finding is that in the research around communication, the brain, this is like, going back to brain science and behavior. This is like, I think what we can talk about really quickly, what are some behavioral strategies through communication, actually? Since we're talking about the power of connection, how do you connect with the people that you might disagree with, on social media? And so I think there are ways you can disagree without being disagreeable. And I think one way to do this is if you respond to, one way is not to respond at all, which is great. But if you really feel that's for right now, that's fine. Maybe is maybe not to engage in that person's Twitter or Facebook comments. That's fine. You don't have to. But I would say I would also suggest you may want to reconsider not defriending them, because this could be an opportunity down the road for you maybe to engage with that person and maybe hear, why is this person thinking this way, responding this way? So I'll give you a really clear example. I have a very dear friend. She, let's put it this way again. We have very different, diverging political opinions. And we voted for different people in the last election, put it that way. And no names mentioned. But one thing I choose to do when I see this person, I say what's a she, but when I see, and it's not just this person. I have other people on Facebook and social media who post things which really elicit a very strong emotional reaction.
How diplomatic of you, Jay.
Yeah, but this is something I realized. The work we do at at Chapman University is talk about mindfulness and contemplative practices, and really begin to recognize why is this person triggering me? What is this person trying to say? And it really goes down to the sense of, like, when we see something on Facebook or social media or whatever that maybe it goes against our grain, what it really is doing, it threatens it threatens our identity. It threatens our sense of who we are, whether that's our political identity, our racial identity, our sexual orientation identity, our gender identity, socioeconomic identity. We're fundamentally driven by our identity. The first thing I say is, what's really taking place here is this person is coming from different, identification. This person maybe just sees the worldview different than I do. The first thing I say is this person's worldview is not wrong. It is just different than what I'm experiencing right now. And then what I say is, how can I respond to this person? The first thing I say is, when I respond to someone, I choose to, it's like Ron saying, "You're like an effing, idiot." Things like that are not going to go over well. Like what the hell are you talking about? The first thing I say is, I hear what you're saying. I understand where they're coming from. But maybe you want to think about it this way. And that actually begins to have a conversation with someone. And these are,
maybe.
In time it might. Even just saying, I hear what you're saying. I don't think it's not my perspective what you're thinking. But what I really trying to say is, like, there are certain, I think all of us can hopefully share a common bond, is none of us wants to see other people actively suffer. I mean, some people do, don't get me wrong. But I think for the most part, the vast majority of Americans really don't want to see our country or democracy or other people of society, in pain or suffering. And so, this one person that I'm thinking about, this person has a dog. So the first thing I say is, so, hey, how's your dog doing? So right away it disarms them. No, it does. I'm not joking. I think that the key point is disarming and de-escalating, which is a key word right now. Is de-escalating. It's only in finding the common bond and not coming from a place of reactivity, and really coming from a place of empathy and compassion. I know these are words which are used by Gandhi and Mandela and King and many social advocates. I was listening to Dr. Cornel West on TV the other day, and this idea is that when we can begin to connect with empathy and with compassion and understand that we're all in this together. And once this begins to happen, this is where I think sustained healing can take place. But it is not going to be easy. I do think there's going to be somewhat of a backlash to all of this. And I think that's something important to talk about. There's going to be backlash. So I think, what we're seeing right now from the other extreme. But at some point, there has to be some form of middle ground we find. We have to. So, I want to maybe hear your thoughts about, how do you feel? Like, tell me what you experienced. How do you begin to engage in conversations with people around this issue?
Well, it's interesting. I would agree that, like, there's going to be, we're always in a pendulum. So we're swinging one way right now, which means we're going to swing the other way where there'll be a backlash. And the hope is to try and find some sort of happy middle. But I also feel that, like, sometimes pendulums get smashed to pieces. And I think that there is a possibility, probably for the first time ever, that the really dark side could maybe actually take a devastating hit in a meaningful way. And I think that's because there is such a multiracial, generational, and gender conversation happening. Because when I see, there was an article that I saw that there was a small town in Nebraska that had 1,000 people, and they had a Black Lives Matter rally. They have exactly one Black person who lives there. And they had 100 people at this rally, and they were all doing a die-in. And I was like, wait, what? In Nebraska? That indicates to me that this is not, it's not just a moment, it's a movement.
Hmm.
But I think, it's, all those phrases about the revolution being televised was what needed to happen, and the youth would be the ones that would lead the way, kind of are true. And so it makes me hopeful. I mean, like, I always lead with like hope and empathy and goodness and energy, because I can't live otherwise. Because I can't live in a dark place. It just isn't. It's just not good for me. And so I am hopeful that folks are really truly understanding that this isn't about trying to tell people that your life doesn't matter. It's that at this particular juncture, Black Lives Matter because it's systems and structures. It's not that we don't care about you, but systems and structures have been in place for centuries that have made things so difficult that it's terrifying to walk down the street. It's
Right.
terrifying to be in a car. Because I know, like, for me, I was a Black woman who lives in New York. I have two older brothers. You know, we've had some very unusual. We grew up in suburbia on Long Island. Fun, not really. Um, and so, very unique circumstances that we've had to encounter in our lifetime and continue to encounter. But I do think that we have an opportunity now to get people to listen. And I think because everyone's attention span, because as you said, like, you feel this moment of empathy, like that could be me, and learn, the amount of resources that are now being put forward. One of my clients is putting together a massive resource, and I was so heartened to see what they're doing. So I think there's a learning, but the act part is the one that worries me, because I think sometimes folks think writing a check solves every problem, and or you throw money at the problem, because in business that is often the thing that has to happen. When you throw money at the problem, it gets solved. And this isn't a throw money at the problem and it gets solved situation. Yes, you do need to throw your money at things for people who know exactly what they're doing, but also internally, what are you doing in every company? What are you doing for your employees? If those employees don't actually exist in your company, what are you doing to make sure those people actually end up in your company? How are you supporting those folks who work for your companies today? As I said, it's exhausting. Like, I'm lucky I work for myself. It would be really weird for me right now if I work for somebody else, in terms of having those conversations, because I don't know if I'd want to have those conversations with a boss of mine. But I do want to live in hope that as people learn and listen, they understand what the actions mean. And the actions mean, like, my old, friend from junior high school, talk to your parents. Like, it is not okay to say the stuff that you're saying. You have kids. Who are your friends' kids? Why do your friends' kids look exactly like you? Like, how could you not make friends with the other brown kids in your school? Like, we all can't change the world at the same level. But I think if we can do things in our actions that are meaningful, those will be lasting. So that you call it out when you see it. You don't stand for BS. If you see something that's ridiculous, you pop your phone open and start recording. I think if we can collectively focus on the action, then I think we'll begin to heal.
Yes. So beautifully said, Laura. This whole, actually, we can't idly sit by and do nothing and just kind of think that this is going to heal by itself. We all are active players in this. And one thing you brought up, Laura, which I think is really important to know. We all are aware, there's been systemic or institutionalized, disenfranchisement or marginalization of certain people, Black people for sure, people of color, women, LGBTQ people. And there's a term I've been using, and I think I want to maybe I kind of introduce it here. What we're experiencing is beyond racism. It's called placism. And placism, as the word place implies, it's as if the people who are in power put people in their place. And the moment you get out of that place, that is when it's a threat to the people in power. One of my colleagues is actually on this conversation, Zoom call, Dr. Gail Stearns. She talks about this quite a lot, and I talk about it also in my happiness course. This idea what we call like, just these hierarchies and these, these social hierarchies. And they're the people at the top, who are threatened when the people who they put in place get out of their, status, where they are, where they are in the hierarchy. They're labeled agitators. There's a really great book by Sarah Ahmed, AHMAD, which I can post later on. We read in the happiness course, and Dr. Gail Stearns, who's actually on this Zoom call, she knows more about it as well. But this whole idea of Sarah Ahmed called the promise, I think it's called the promise of happiness. I got her, but AHMED, this is a great read, Sarah Ahmed, she talks about this. When people who try to break out of this placism, so the word I think is really, because in Catholics, now placism, implies racism, homophobia, gender, it's like an all-inclusive term, placism. So what it really implies is there are structures, and this is the thing we have to really be aware of. Many people aren't even aware of them because they're so unconscious. The social structural biases, the what are called social constructs. These societal constructs are so embedded and because they're unconscious, they're invisible. And many people don't see them. And so what we really have to be aware of is that it is because when people begin to actively voice, no, I'm not going to be put in my place. This place you put me in was to make you comfortable and happy, right? So, I talk about the science of a happy brain, the happiness course. One thing we always talk about, even in this genconnectU for investing in happiness, happiness is not an individual pursuit. We cannot be truly happy. Well, happiness is a societal endeavor as well. And so when there are segments of society that are actively being denied the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, only because it makes the people who are on top of the social stratus, it keeps them happy. The moment other people below the strata, in the social construct begin to revolt, begin to voice their opinion, guess what? They're labeled agitators. They're labeled troublemakers. They're labeled angry and violent. Look what's going on right now. They're labeled all these terms in order to say, look, I told you, these people that you put in their place, they're dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
What they're doing. So this is something we really have to talk about here in this conversation, if we can, is understand. I think the people who, one thing we need to understand for people who may not recognize the institutionalized, systemic, I think platforms that have been put into place to keep people in their place. This whole idea of placism. It's really that the whole idea of placism is to ensure that the people who are on top remain happy and remain in power and remain, happy and healthy and okay. But it's at the act of denial of everyone else. So one thing we have to be aware of, in this conversation is make people understand is that look at how this works. Look at how this system or this formula works. Everything around placism is structured around the idea that everyone has to keep their voices quiet. Everyone has to be quiet and not to be put you in your place. So the moment we have to realize we are going to be called agitators. We are going to be called troublemakers. But every single movement, whether it is Nelson Mandela, Mahatma Gandhi, Sarah Chavez, Harvey Milk, all these people were labeled agitators because they threatened the status quo. But it is through this voicing of indignation or, you can't put me in my place. So what we're seeing right now, kind of in this idea of placism, what we're witnessing right now is generations of individuals, not just people, Black people, but I think people of all stripes saying, I have been put in my place for far too long, and I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. Also one thing, this is in Sarah Ahmed's book, and Rosa Parks stood up at the bus, is at the back of the bus, and refused to sit in the back of the bus in the 50s. When she was asked why she did it, she said, "I'm tired." And
Yeah.
when you said "I'm tired," it wasn't I'm not physically tired. I'm just emotionally, psychologically, just tired. I'm tired of being put in my place.
It's interesting. I love Placism. I think that's a great way of putting it all because I think there. I hope you trademark that because I think I'm going to use it everywhere now because I think it encapsulates why this may actually work right at this moment because there is it's clearly visible as to who the people who think they are in charge. Like there's a president who sort of embodies what that looks like in a certain way. And it's not so much the age, but it's like the thought process about like if you think about all the things that they want you to do and how they want to revert back to what was in place 50, 60 years ago versus what's happening now, it makes sense. And I think that's why we have a chance now because nobody's in place anymore. It's like there isn't a bucket of people where it's like, oh, well, you could say it's the young people and they want to be in their place. Well, like, no, there are a lot of young people who are like, yeah, no, I'm not doing this. And it's not just about the ones who are of color, who are immigrants, who are women. There are plenty of young white guys out there who are marching with signs saying Black Lives Matter right now. Mm-hmm. And I think it is because similar, like, if you think about it, that generation is also the generation that has grown up with school shootings. Mm-hmm. One of the most insane things about this insane pandemic timing is that we haven't had a school shooting in 4 months. But think about the generation of kids starting from 1998, 1999. There has been school shootings every single month for about 20 years. There's a generation of kids who've grown up in fear for their lives at school because their place was to be like, well, okay, you can go to school, but guns are okay. Guns are far more important than your safety. And so even if they may not understand what this means from a racial moment, the moment that, oh, I want to be able to walk safely into my school, into my college, into a movie theater, is not here. And if I move along with these other movements congruently, I can make those changes too. So I want to hop on board. So that's why I think that, you could be very right about around the idea of Placism, that outside of a few certain groups, everybody else has a stratification of place. And if you look at it and say, I don't want to be stuck in this bucket anymore. I want to be able to have my life, my freedom, my ability to roam without being in fear. Because it all comes down to fear. Everyone's just afraid. I'm afraid because I don't want to get bothered because of the color of my skin, or because I'm a woman, or because of my age. And it could, if someone had a disability, I don't want to be treated differently because I have a disability. And if we're at this point now where we're able to have honest conversations and say, listen, kind of like Noah's Ark, everybody can get on board. everyone get on board. Like, let's get out of here. And those who aren't with the program and want to be stuck in their old set of ways of place, they're going to get left behind.
Yeah, no, you're so spot on, Laura. I think what we're witnessing right now is generational trauma of placism. And I think the reason why we're seeing, like you just said, so many people come out to the street, it's not just Black people, it's everyone who's experienced some way in which they have felt somehow put in their place or told what to do and not have a voice. So, I never thought about this, but this is really true. The younger generation and school kids especially, or even college students where I teach at college, we're actively aware that we could have a school shooting, God forbid it never happens, but we're always under that constant potential threats. And I can't even imagine, what it's in myself getting empathy. I can maybe hear you, but I've never experienced myself the trauma when I was in school, worrying about school shootings. It just wasn't a thing. Like, there were other things to worry about, which are fun. Like, couldn't take the prom, or who the cool kids are, but never to worry about, my school. But I think what we're really experiencing, this is why I think it's really great to introduce this new term called placism, because I think this idea is that we begin to look at placism. It's racism as part of this, but there are other, I think, ways in which we marginalize or force people into a place in society. And it's the only reason why that is done is to appease or to keep the people who are at top, to make them happy. So it's almost like appropriate, what's that word? Portioned happiness. Like happiness, it's in our society. If you think about the structures that are there, and this is really true, and this could pull the veil off of a lot of things that we see here. And what's really happened, the veil is being lifted. The wounds being exposed, if you will. And a point you brought up earlier is that it is the darkness and the ugliness and the pain have to come up in order to be healed. It's the quote I said earlier on about Rumi. The wound is the place where the light enters you. And so it's through this deep, powerful wound of our nation's soul, if you will, where we have the opportunity for this light of justice and compassion and empathy to come in, and really for deep, profound healing to occur. But the ugliness, the darkness, the hostility, the rage, all the things that have, I think, in some ways, been part of the illness or sickness of our American democracy. And no way, I'm not. If people hear this, please don't get me wrong. I'm not an American patriot. I love America. My parents are immigrants. We came to this country, so I love this country dearly. But in the same way you love someone dearly, you recognize their faults. You recognize they're not perfect. Whether it's a husband, or a child, or even our politicians, or corporate leaders, or even people like in police force or priests. Teachers. No one's perfect. And so we have to recognize even democracy is not perfect. When we think of this thing called America, America is a great country. It's an ideal. But in order to heal our nation's soul, we have to let this wound heal. And this is what I feel, I wrote a great piece on LinkedIn, and I'll post it on the genconnectU Facebook, and I'll share it, Laura, on your Instagram and Twitter as well. I wrote a LinkedIn article called "Healing Our Nation's Soul," and this really, I think, is what the period we're in right now. And I feel optimistic. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but I do feel optimistic and hopeful that we could, for our first time, see deep, enduring, lasting change, transformation take place that brings about a profound, beautiful healing of the very chronic wounds in our soul, our nation's soul.
Yeah, I think you're so right. I think it's one of those things where we have an opportunity to have meaningful and lasting change because we all are connecting to each other, and at our sort of deepest, most authentic way. And I think because, again, like what I was talking about, that kind of toxic soup that all happened at the exact same time, where the ability for people to be more vulnerable and be more empathetic, and also to be able to look inward. I think this doesn't, because also remember, these protests don't happen unless there's lockdowns, which means people can't go to work. So they're home. You have college students who would be at college right now. You have high school students who would be at high school, can't go to high school. So, all of these sort of dominoes kind of had to fall into place at this particular juncture to allow people to connect with each other. Because, what's happening when you see these protests, and I've seen with lots of my friends, is not just that folks are getting together and like, oh, nice to meet you at the protest. But like, hey, what are you working on? How can we build together? Because that's actually how we actually will actually heal this moving forward. That like the energy and the action and the stick-to-itiveness that comes from the protest now gets put into action. And the companies who are making those statements and then listening to their employees of color and saying, what is it you need us to do? But actually fully making those actions going forward are going to be the things that happen. Because now, if you're that Black employee who never talks to that senior person in your company, but now they sent you a note being like, hey, like you have an opportunity for connection. And we all know that like, the whole point about the power of connection is that when you are top of mind, when you engage with someone with a degree of good, positive energy, that's when the magic happens. That's when the real lasting change happens. That's when, like, oh, I know you're doing this. I'm doing this. We should work together. Or you're doing this. I know someone who's doing exactly the same thing. I should connect you. Let me get out of the way. Like, that's what can happen right now. And hopefully, as a result of this, it puts us on a really incredible path forward that if and when the pendulum does swing the other way, we've built up so much resistance that just gets stopped.
Yeah. No, you said it. So I think you have a great point. This idea of connection. I know you and I both we talk about this in our genconnectU courses. Connection can actually bring about innovation. Innovation is what brings about change, or disruption, if you will. And we talk about the whole idea of disruption in technology or in companies and in the corporate world, but disruption can take place in society as well. But it's only through sharing deep, meaningful ideas and thoughts. And I think, the work you do as well in the corporate world, and even the work I do for organizations or even my university, it's this idea that if you are a CEO or president of a university or a company or an employer, it's recognizing that every single individual in your organization provides value, brings meaning, and ultimately has a purpose. And we are in this together. If we look at America as a I don't want to say corporation, but we're a collective, if you will. We are a collective. We're a collective of different people with different identities, religions, races, political views, socioeconomic views. But we're all in this together. And that's the thing I think ultimately is, a way to just to realize this. It is the reason why I'm hoping that I feel optimistic about where this is leading, is that we need to count on each other more so than ever. We need each other now more than ever. It's during times of crisis and during times of uncertainty when we realize how interdependent and interconnected we really are. So, I think maybe just, as we start, kind of wrapping it up, just say, reach out to people. The power of connection is how not only does it help, it heals. Reach out to others that are maybe struggling, or maybe reach out to someone who is perhaps has been, on the receiving end a lot of this injustice. With a person of color, and just listen. You don't have to solve anything. So, I like that, listen, learn, act, I think is what you said. So, I like to listen, learn, and lead. We need leaders as well. We need people who can lead us into this new movement or the healers, if you will. I'm going to say this because I think this is really true. I think the protesters that are out there, if you're a protester, someone out in the street doing this, I want you to maybe think to yourself, not just the protester, but as a healer.
That's an awesome way to sum it up. To kind of wrap up, I think it's one of those things where, what's one thing you think as a piece of advice for someone who's like, okay, I'm doing all this work and I think I'm healing, but I'm not certain. What's one thing you think that you can say, like, listen, there's an action that you can take that can help put you on that path to healing?
So there's personal healing and there's collective healing. So on a personal healing, be gentle and kind to yourself. Especially if you're someone who is out there who is a healer in the world right now for social healing. Be gentle and kind to yourself. This is the long haul we're in for. This is not like a short sprint. We're in the marathon. I feel we're just kind of in the starting stages of it. I think we have to be mindful of our healing ourselves, but also reach out to this whole idea of connection. Our brains are fun. Your brain, my brain, everyone's brain is fundamentally a social organ. We are driven, and we are fundamentally. Uh, we need community. We need connection, and most of all, we crave the need to belong. So reach out that one person if you can, and just say, you know what, I'm here for you. Even if I don't understand you, just know I'm here for you. And just know that when we begin to witness and hear and see each other people recognize that, and once other people realize they're being seen, witnessed, and heard, it allows for their healing to take place as well.
Awesome. I think that's a great way to sum it up. I think, and I would agree. I think, reach out. I mean, I call it, in my course, I call it the 5 for 5, and pick 5 people you haven't talked to in 5 weeks, 5 months, 5 years, 5 minutes, 5 days, and just say, hey, how are you doing? And that was before all of this even happened, where it's like, you never know what someone's going through, and a, a surprising hello from someone that they didn't expect, not someone you hate, but someone that you haven't probably talked to in a while, and letting folks know that you're just thinking of them, because this is not an easy period for anyone. And I think if we're able to give everybody some grace and some empathy, we'll all move forward in a really positive and impactful way for us as a nation.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And I think, a nice way to end this for me is like, say, let's always remember, be courageous, be brave, always let your light shine forth fully and brightly, because the world will be a much dimmer place without you in it. I know that together, we light a path for others, we light a path for ourselves. And so collectively, I know we are the torchbearers to our brighter future. And I know it only happens when we're together. When our individual lights come together, it is a flame that cannot be extinguished.
Awesome. Well, that's just an awesome way to end this, Jay. Well, Dr. Jay Kumar, that was fantastic. So despite some technical issues, I think we had a phenomenal conversation, and I had a chance to chat with you. And, in the show notes, you'll see links to Dr. J's course, my course, but more importantly, take care of each other, be good to each other, and most importantly, take care of yourselves. Because remember, the oxygen mask goes on you first before you help anybody else. Also, we hope this is giving you an opportunity to listen, to learn something new like Placism, and hopefully find some meaningful actions that will help you along the way in this really unique time. So thank you all for watching.
Thank you, Laura. Thanks to genconnectU, and thanks for everyone.
Awesome. And that is our recording with genconnectU.